Caleb Williams finally laid to rest a lot of the nonsense rumors surrounding him in this pre-draft process. He's not demanding an ownership stake in a team. He's not going to wiggle his way out and demand a trade somewhere else. And he wants to be a Chicago Bear if they draft him.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we take a look at what Caleb Williams told ESPN this week as a way of clearing the air a little bit ahead of his first interviews here in Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine, and why he would be happy to be a Chicago Bear, and a lot of the other things that have been put out there about him through this pre-draft process, just not true, and finally kind of giving us some clarity in a lot of those situations. And along with that, we got the NFL Players Association releasing their team report cards, where players evaluate their own franchise and organization, and that hints at some of why Caleb Williams would want to play for a team like the Chicago Bears, because there's a lot of reasons even off the field as well. But we'll wrap up with something specific in that report card that jumped up to me, specifically the head coach rankings, and where I think there's some discontinuity there between what we think and hear outside of the organization and then what's actually reported in the report card. But I want to start with Caleb Williams and the big story at ESPN, sitting down with them and talking through what he's been going through in the pre-draft process, how he's been approaching this. And to no one's surprise, he's happy to go anywhere that he would go in the draft, whether the Bears take him at 1 or trade the pick and somebody else takes him at 1, or however that might work. Like, he'll go wherever he needs to go, and really kind of eliminated any of the lingering doubts that never really had any legs to them and never really had any substantiated reporting by them. But there was always those sort of lingering thoughts. It's oh, well, someone said once that maybe Caleb didn't want to go to the Chicago Bears, or that he didn't want to play in Chicago, and that he would force their hand in an Eli Manning type of Philip Rivers deal, where he just would refuse there and demand that if they take him, that they need to trade him. And that, of course, none of that was true. You also there was talk that he was going to demand that whatever team drafted him number 1, in addition to his rookie contract, he needed an equity stake in the team. He wanted part ownership in that team. Well, first of all, that's not allowed under NFL rules. But second of all, no, that's not part of his approach in this pre-draft process. He's just trying to go through it like any other top quarterback. He wants to be the number 1 overall pick. He wants to go to a team that's going to be successful. He wants to win. But he's not going to make a big stink about this process just to get to one particular destination or need some special treatment beyond anything else. Same thing throughout this whole process. It was, well, he could just stay in school and get NIL money and not come out of the draft. Obviously, we're past the deadline for that. But again, that's not part of the equation here either. He gets a fully guaranteed rookie contract, financial security for a full 4 seasons, as opposed to NIL, where once you're out of college, if you blow your knee or your Achilles or something, you can't play anymore. That's all you got. At least there's a lot more protections and guarantees with an NFL contract as a rookie quarterback. So the quote from Caleb Williams that really hammers this home about the Bears, he said, quote, "If I get drafted by the Bears, I'll be excited. If they trade the pick and I get drafted by someone else, I'm just as excited. Speaking about Chicago, they have a talented team, a talented offense and defense. For anyone to be in that situation, I think they'd be excited." Now, obviously, this is him saying all the right things, trying to do the more politician style of yeah, okay, he's going to make sure he doesn't want to make anybody mad, wants to kind of clear the air, wants to say all the right things to be viewed as, the guy that Chicago should want with the number 1 overall pick. So he's not going to come out and say anything outrageous at this point in the process. The article from ESPN generally served as public relations in a lot of ways, in exchange for access to Caleb and him giving them quotes. which is great for ESPN to generate traffic and all this stuff. He's also going to be able to put out generally the kind of message that he wanted to put out, which honestly was necessary in this case to kind of clear the air that all of this nonsense had been sort of stirring around his draft situation that never had any actual merit to it. But until he comes out and kind of definitively says, no, I'm not going to demand a trade. Yes, I would be happy to go to the Chicago Bears. Like, until you explicitly hear that and get that from him, there's always just like that little bit of doubt left in there that is always in the back of people's minds and can certainly be in the sports radio conversation, the sports television conversation. Well, what if Caleb demands a trade and doesn't want to go to the Chicago Bears? And what if he wants a team ownership to them? And it becomes these like, it becomes a story on its own, even though it never really started as a story, but just like to be able to talk about it hypothetically and have these different potential storylines behind the scenes there was just off-season fodder. And you don't know whether that's something somebody put out there intentionally to try and murky up the Caleb Williams draft situation, or if that's just, speculation that started from someone on Twitter that ended up getting some real legs behind it. Either way, like, hopefully now with these comments from Caleb, and we're going to hear from him later this week here in Indianapolis at the Scouting Combine, all of that can kind of be done, and we can get back to like having real meaningful conversations about like, okay, what does he do well? What does he not do well? Where does he need to be better? How does he compare to these other quarterbacks? How would he fit on each of these teams, and how might they go about this process in the ways that like actually matter, and not just nonsense about, well, he might not want to play here, or he might need this, or he might have gotten more NIL money. It's like, no, he's going through this process just like every other number one overall pick quarterback has gone through it before. It's not going to be a special case in a lot of other ways, other than him being just a really good prospect and a player that you could really be excited about your team drafting, just like he said he could be excited about coming to a team like the Chicago Bears. So that's where Caleb sets the record straight and is excited to be a part of this team. And we also got a better sense of like why players in general like to be a part of the Chicago Bears, because the NFL Players Association released their report cards today, and it gives us a glimpse into, anonymously, how each player feels about their organization and the more the off the field stuff, not just like how they did on the field. So we'll dive into that and why there's a lot to like there for Chicago, and why players like Caleb should like the facilities and stuff that they're coming to in Chicago, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. It can be easy to ignore our social battery and spread ourselves too thin, especially with social gatherings picking up. Certainly, I've been doing that a little bit too much down here in Indianapolis, if I'm being honest with you. And so therapy can be a way to really recharge and give you the kind of self-awareness to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. And BetterHelp is a great way of getting started. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try, because it's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, and then they'll match you with a licensed therapist. And you know what? If that first therapist is just not the right one for you, no worries. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. It's a great service. I cannot recommend it enough to help you really be your best. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. The NFL Players Association released their team report cards from the players. They anonymously surveyed players about their own teams, and they could evaluate their own teams on kind of a wide range of criteria. Not so much on the field, right? They're not saying, oh, our offensive coordinator, how do you judge his offense, or our defense, how do you judge his, exactly on-field coaching? But it's the everything else, the kind of things that teams have a lot of control over, and the kind of things that aren't mitigated or aren't limited by the salary cap. It's facilities, it's training, it's weight room, it's locker rooms, it's communication. I mean, it's all these sort of off-field things that are important. We can't directly measure how they affect winning and losing, but they certainly should have some effect on winning and losing. If you have a proper, weightlifting facilities and training staff to help your players, be at their physical peak, to help have proper recovery staff to help players not be injured as much. Like, these things do have real on-field impacts but the report card itself is not trying to measure exactly, what the teams did on the field. So as the report cards came out, they sort of had the players give letter grades for things, and then they kind of average it out. I think the Bears ranked overall 10th on their report card. Every category gets an A through F grade, and the Bears got a C+ for treatment of families, a C for food and cafeteria, a C+ for nutritionist/dietitian. So already a theme there that the food and the general nutrition program with the Bears, not exactly grading well. Those are their lowest grades, the C+, C, and C+ in there. But then locker room, A-, training room, B+, training staff, B, weight room, A, strength coaches, B, travel team, B, head coach, B, ownership, B+. If that was your child's report card, I think you'd be pretty happy about it, right? I mean, I don't know what the grade point average is there. Obviously, you're shooting for all A's, but if we're going to be realistic there, no one's going to get all A's. And I think generally it reflects a pretty positive organization that players would be wanting to be a part of, to be able to go to a place where your locker room is really well regarded. They go to some specifics in there about how all the players say it's big enough, the lockers are spacious, like there's a bunch of cold tubs, a bunch of hot tubs, like they've got the kind of little things in the facility that we might not think about when we're not in the locker room and we're not NFL athletes, but the kind of things that are really important to them for their recovery, for all the things to be able to be at their best in between games. And so that's definitely an encouraging part of this process, and I can see where someone like Caleb Williams might not, at this stage of the process, as a college prospect, know what the Bears' locker room facilities are like or what their nutrition program is like, and he can't necessarily be sitting there thinking, if I'm drafted by the Bears, how are their dietitians, right? Like, he's not going to know that, and that's not necessarily going to be a big part of his process there, but it certainly paints a picture of a destination, whether it's a player in the draft or a player in a free agency, to want to come to a team like this and be a part of the facilities there that ultimately help them be more comfortable, if not put them in a better position to be successful. The clear losing part there is the food, the nutrition, and the dietary stuff, where players kind of reported that they'd like to have healthier options, that they don't all feel like they have great access to individualized meal plans in some ways, and that maybe the food preparation could be better. I don't know if that means the Bears need some better chefs around there, or because they certainly emphasize this with their sports science staff and really focus on player nutrition quite a bit. It's not for lack of effort, but perhaps the execution hasn't been quite where the Bears want it to be. The other thing that's important to keep in mind with these report cards is not just the letter grades there, but how the team ranks with each of those letter grades, because in that case, like, not all A's and B's and C's are created equally on this NFLPA report card. Like, for example, the Bears have a C+ in treatment of families, which is one of their lowest grades, but across the NFL, it ranks 11th out of 32 teams. That's the 11th best grade, because apparently that would be 21 other teams have lower than a C+ grade than the Bears C+ in terms of treatment of family. Like, that seems to be the kind of thing where across the board teams are scoring low, whereas, like, comparatively, their strength coach got a B, a solid grade, but the strength coach's grade ranks 22nd out of 32 teams, in the bottom 10 of the NFL. So clearly 21 other teams have higher than just that regular B grade, but however they kind of math it out in terms of numbers. 21 other teams were rated as having better strength coaches or better strength program than the Chicago Bears. And so that's where it's like you can be happy with the B, but you can also look at it and go, ooh, maybe that B has more room for improvement there. Whereas, like, sure, like, treatment of families also has more room for improvement, but, like, it's at least doing a lot better than a lot of the other teams. Like, I think comparatively, they said the Los Angeles Chargers reported that they charge their players for childcare on game day. I think it was like $75 for the first child to like have them be watched while they're playing in the game, and then it's like $50 per additional child just to, again, essentially babysit them while the players are out there playing. Like, it's just the kind of thing where it's like there's no reason for a team to have to charge for that, right? Like, are they short on cash there? Like, can they not afford to watch these, to set up childcare for these teams? Like, the Bears, I think, do have childcare for teams, and there was some other details in there about them improving their treatment of families from last year's report card to this year's report card. Like, the Bears are making progress on this, but it just goes to show that, like, the teams do pay attention to this stuff. Like, again, it's not limited by the salary cap. It's up to ownership and management to decide, okay, how much money do we want to invest in our locker rooms? How much money do we want to invest in our treatment of families, in our travel, in our food and nutrition programs? Like, that just comes out of their budget and their regular pocketbooks and stuff, but it's not dictated by the NFL. So an owner that has a lot of money and a lot of willingness to spend could build brand new facilities all over the place and pay for it themselves and improve their grades in this report card thing. And an owner who is all about pinching every penny, and I'm not saying the Bears are this at all, but I'm just saying comparatively, like, an owner who's all about pinching every penny and squeezing every dollar out can skimp in some of these areas and then get lower grades. And this is the way for the NFL Players Association to, a little more politely and indirectly say, like, hey, here's how you're doing. If you're not doing well, you should do better. This is our way of kind of calling you out, but still kind of respecting the protection of the players, being able to share these opinions without having to, put their name behind it specifically, and then also just get the message across to ownership and the rest of the league that, hey, if you come to that team, here's what you can expect with those things. That without these report cards, how would you know what another team's strength staff is like? How would you know how great their home locker room is, I guess? How would you know what their food program's like? You can ask teammates and players there, but it's all just anecdotal. This is a little bit more data-driven behind it, actually accumulating now multiple years of report cards on these teams to see how they're getting better or worse in those areas. The one I really want to focus in on a little bit more is head coach, specifically. We said that the Bears got a B grade there, I believe. That's not a bad grade overall, but the ranking is interesting, and I think some of the added details in there paint a slightly different picture than how I think we view the perception of how Matt Eberflus is viewed in the locker room. And I want to sort of dive into where things align and where things might be a little bit differently based on what this report card said next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now is a great time to get started on FanDuel if you've never used it before, because new customers will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So you bet $5 on anything. And if your bet wins, not only do you get the winnings for your $5 bet, but then you're going to get $150 in bonus bets added into your account on top of that you can use to bet on anything. So right now, plenty of NFL draft prop bets, getting some good information on those prospects down here in Indianapolis on who's going to be drafted first, second, where certain players are going to go, how many players at each position are going to be drafted in the first round, etc. Or you can bet on all of your other favorite sports: college basketball, NBA, hockey, soccer, tennis, boxing. I mean, baseball season's right around the corner. You name it, they've got it all at FanDuel. So to get your $150 in bonus bets, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA and NFL. The Bears scored generally well on these NFLPA report cards, but the one specific area that I wanted to dive into a little bit more that stood out to me is not the exact grade that they got, but the ranking and some of the details on the head coach position in particular. Now, the head coach grade was not a reflection of, like, specifically how successful of a coach they've been. I mean, like, I think Bill Belichick ended up getting a fairly low grade. I think it was in, like, C- or C there. Like, and obviously, I guess they lost and fired him, but not the point, right? It's not like, oh, do I think my coach is any good? Are we winning or losing because of this coach? It was not meant to be like an on-field evaluation per se of the head coach, but more about, like, the leadership, organizational type, culture type things for a head coach. And so for the Chicago Bears and Matt Eberflus, they got a B, which is fine. Like we were talking about earlier, like a B grade is really solid from the NFL Players Association. But that B grade ranked 25th in the NFL. And that was the part that was interesting to me, because again, like, this is not measuring how good they've been on the field. It's measuring, like, again, like locker room and leadership and culture and stuff. But that's supposed to be Matt Eberflus's, like, specialty, his strong suit. Now, in there, along with the B grade, they said that 81% of Bears players feel that head coach Matt Eberflus is efficient with their time, and that ranked 23rd overall. 22 other teams had head coaches whose players felt like they were more efficient with their time than Matt Eberflus. They also said that generally players feel that Matt Eberflus is somewhat willing to listen to their locker room, and that rating ranked 18th overall. So we're talking, generally speaking here, middle of the pack to below average in terms of how Bears players reported Matt Eberflus's ability to, listen to them and be involved with them and kind of have that proper communication there. Like, this is not me saying the Bears have a bad culture under Matt Eberflus, by all means, no. But, like, we've had this perception that the players love Matt Eberflus and that he's really, like, his strong suit. Yes, he's been a good defensive coordinator before, but he's not here because he's the X's and O's genius, like a Mike McDonald or whoever from the Ravens going to the Seahawks, like one of those guys who's revolutionizing defensive scheme. But he's here because he can instill that leadership, that culture, that system, the hits principle, et cetera, and like get the most out of players from a motivation and just a managing human beings aspect. But that's exactly what it feels like this grade is intended to measure. And again, like, B is not a bad grade. This is not like, oh, Eberflus is actually, quote unquote, bad at this. But it's really surprising to me that he ended up ranking that low in the process. Like 25th? That there are then, 24 head coaches ahead of him in terms of how players evaluate them as communicators, as leaders in that regard. Like, that's what's so surprising to me. Like, it was different last year when it was Matt Eberflus's first season and the Bears were having a lot of turnover on the roster. And they are still turning over the roster somewhat, but like, when he was first coming in, there was a lot where it was a bunch of new guys who hadn't been here before and guys on one-year deals and the team's not doing very well. There's a little bit more of an understanding there where maybe they're not going to, maybe they'll be a bias in some ways or just not have the super kindest grades in that kind. Like, I was one last year to kind of say, all right, let's give him a couple years here to kind of really establish his system and his culture and all that stuff. So after 1 year, okay, whatever. Year two, I wouldn't say, everything is firmly. I mean, everything is more or less established, but, there's still a process of kind of getting through year three and kind of trying to really entrench yourself and have the same players be there for 2 or 3 seasons in your system and really kind of have that culture locked in. I think it's pretty well set, but it's not, this is not the long-time head coaches who, the Patriot way, where that's just instilled in the locker room. Like, I think they're close. But so I'm again willing to say, like, maybe it's a little early in the Matt Eberflus career to say, maybe he's not, to be concerned about this, but at the same time, like, it just caught me right away that, like, 25th on the head coach grade for a guy who is supposed to be beloved and seems to be genuinely liked by a lot of players. Like, this grade is not them saying we don't like Matt Eberflus. I just thought it would be higher. Like, not that I thought the B would be higher, but I thought the ranking would be higher. That 24 other teams like their coach a little bit better than the Bears like Matt Eberflus. Like, that to me really stood out there, and that's why I wanted to kind of hone in on that grade specifically and try and explore some of the questions there of, like, how does that align and disalign with how we perceive the way Matt Eberflus is like in the locker room. Like, I'm not trying to make a controversy out of it. It's just more like something to think about, something to keep in the back of our minds as we work through this process. Of, like, that's a big reason why he was retained as a head coach, is all the players really liked him and really wanted him back and believe in what they're doing here. So I'm surprised that wasn't more clearly reflected in the grades from the report card. Love to hear what you think about all these Bears report card grades. Let us know in the comments on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears or post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. However you do it, just make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We'll keep coming back to you here on site in Indianapolis at the NFL Scouting Combine. We're going to get some player workouts going tomorrow, and we'll have lots of draft content to break down for you as well. So come on back for that. And, of course, I always want to make sure you get to come on back for another opportunity to bear down.